One.
We are live. Is everyone ready?
We were born ready.
All right. It is Friday, October 5th, 2018. I'm Micah Sargent, and right now we are going to talk about remembering Steve Jobs, that horrific report from Bloomberg that's just got everyone frightened and how ridiculous that is. Tim Cook talking about Apple privacy, Apple's hopeful October event, and so much more, because this is the iMore Show. Back again this week is the steadfast and ever true, the one and only Lori Gill. How are you doing today, Lori Gill?
The show is going to be so boring and lame.
Because Georgia's not here.
There's no Georgia Dow.
Look, Georgia, okay, let me just go ahead and I'll just put it out there. I'm sorry, listeners. Georgia and I got into a fight, and so she couldn't be on the show this week. See, Apple is going to be releasing some new, the emoji have already been put into place, but Apple has the artwork and everything ready for the next iteration of iOS, and there's a foot emoji, and I absolutely hate feet, and Georgia loves to tease me about them. So I said, Georgia, I just really don't think that you and I can ever be on a show again. And so that's why that's happening. No, that's not true. She will hopefully be back next week, but she isn't here this week. But we do have her partner in crime and the often target of her Apple gadget thievery. It is Renee Ritchie. How you doing, Renee?
Let the horn of Helm Deep ring one last time, Micah. Now for wrath, now for feet, an emoji ending.
Ooh, I like that. That was good.
Yeah.
That's all I had left.
Well, that is a fantastic introduction to the show this week. And let's go ahead and talk about today, October 5th, is the anniversary of the passing of Steve Jobs. He passed away in 2011 on today's date. And I still remember where there are certain things in your life, and for some people, especially those of us in the US, the Twin Towers going down is one of those, where were you when this happened kind of thing. For people super into music, where were you when we heard that Michael Jackson passed away? And for those of us in tech, especially who focused on Apple, many of us remember where we were when we heard that Steve Jobs had passed away.
See, I was going to say John Lennon. That's how much older I am than Micah.
I was going to say Prince.
Oh, see, Prince. Yeah, Prince is a good one.
Lori's younger than all of us. Yeah.
In heart, young at heart.
There you go. Yeah. I believe that, actually.
Yeah. So Micah, actually, Renee did write a very heartfelt sentiment on iMore. It almost brought me to tears, just what he wrote. It was a very sweet sentiment. And it did kind of trigger memories for me of remembering that day, finding out. I wasn't even as deep into sort of the tech blogging world at that time. I was still kind of new to the whole industry. I had just recently gotten my iPhone for the first time, and an iPad, I think, that year. It was very, very close to that time. So it did kind of trigger some memories for me. Micah, what were you doing? Like, what do you remember that sort of moment when you had heard the news about it?
Yeah, I was a freshman in college. Yes, I'm a youngster. I was a freshman in college, and I remember it because I had gotten the notification on my iPhone, and I had went back to my room, and my roommate at the time, he was such a good guy, and he knew that I was like super into tech and that I was writing, about tech at the company that I worked for at the time. And so he actually he came up to me and was like, "Hey, are you okay?" And had sort of asked if I was, doing okay, and knew what had happened. And yeah, I remember just sort of being like, wow, and immediately sort of trying to understand what had happened and how that had gone down. And then sort of taking a break to wait for the awesome stories that I knew were soon to come. And the people who had spent time actually with this man, their stories and their thoughts on the passing of Steve Jobs, and also just sort of wondering where the company, was headed next. Because when Steve Jobs had passed, Tim Cook was already sort of, Renee, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was already sort of in line to do.
He was CEO. Steve Jobs moved over from CEO to executive chairman, right before.
That's right. Yeah. So we knew that Tim Cook was sort of going to be taking the lead in his absence, but that's where I was, literally physically in my in a class in a lecture hall when I got the notification. And it must have been a boring class because I do remember looking at the notification right when it happened, and then talking about it afterward with some of my friends.
It was the day after the iPhone event. That's the thing that was so startling, is that
Wow.
they did that entire iPhone event knowing how imminent all
His
of that
passing
was. Yeah.
So Renee, then let's hear your thoughts on where you were. Were you at that Apple event?
No, that was before Apple paid much attention to iMore, and I mean, that's not a bad thing, because people there probably did hear about what was happening, and I don't know if I could have taken that. Not, and it's not an Apple thing. It's just Steve Jobs shaped so much of our culture, of our history, of the technological face of the world. And I remember that story about Tim Cook just talking to somebody. I think it was the day before the event, and he said, "I've got to go. My boss is calling." And it was so interesting. Like I linked to his Stanford commencement speech, which to me is just one of the best. He was an orator. He wasn't like a classical orator, like you hear some politicians or like Shakespearean thespians who give these speeches, because he was very plain spoken, and he did have some hyperbole, like his boom and screamers and those kind of things. But he was a very plain spoken speaker, but he was such a good speaker. He just owned that stage, and he owned that podium. And he spoke about, like, for people not familiar with it, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and told that he had days to live. And he said that, like, that was an incredible lens that clarified his entire life. It later turned out that he had the one kind of pancreatic cancer that wasn't immediately terminal, but they didn't know that at first. And he was already a focused man, like a person who had done the Mac and the iMac, and was working towards the iPhone. And it's just, it's super interesting. And I don't want to sugarcoat it, because Steve Jobs was a complicated person, and he had good points and bad points, like everybody. And some people loved working for him, and some people hated working for him. But I think when you look at the sum total of his life, and you look at the technology that he enabled, he didn't sit there and forge it like with an Uru hammer in a workshop all by himself, but he put the ingredients together to make things like the Mac and the iPod and the iPhone and the iPad and Apple, which is his crowning product achievement, a company that can keep making those kinds of products like AirPods and everything like that. It's a huge influence, I think, on everything that we do every day.
I think something really interesting about Steve Jobs, from my perspective, if I think of the outside the tech world kind of ideology, he's the first superstar CEO, or at least one of the first superstar CEOs ever. Now there's a lot more names that you recognize, but when he was head of Apple, everybody knew the name Steve Jobs. Everyone knew who that was. They even when there's CEOs of much larger companies making much more money for their companies, for some reason he's shown he was a superstar. I do think, Renee, your comment about his oration, I think that's possibly one of the reasons why you kind of hear these sentiments about how Apple is never going to be the same again after Steve Jobs, or still to this day you hear these kind of comments. They're usually speaking to some kind of negative issue with the company itself. But I think the reason that we have such high standards for what we expect from Apple is not because of what Apple produced with Steve Jobs at the helm, but the way he inspired us and excited us about the products that we were going to see. I think it was more about the way he engaged us than it was about the products that we were receiving, because they're not any different today than they were when he was in charge, and some of them are better. And I know that there are some pitfalls from the Apple company, but there were then too. It's just that Steve Jobs was so enigmatic that you just felt like you wanted to be in his presence.
I have a tough question for you, Lori. A question that's going to be hard to answer. What made you smile more? Steve Jobs as CEO of Apple or as CEO of Pixar?
I don't know. You can't answer that one. Because they're two amazing. He did amazing things at both places and helped bring two companies from very almost, you know, complete annihilation back into like the amazing thing that they are. So like I
The
can't.
wonderful comment I heard is that he brought design to Apple's engineers and he brought engineering to Pixar's designers.
Oh,
I
that's a
like
great.
that.
Yeah.
So I remember I took a public speaking class because I had to, you fill out your elections, blah, blah, blah. And so I really liked public speaking. So I took a public speaking class, and the first speech that we gave was an informational speech. So we had an informational speech, a persuasive speech, and then I think like a group speech was the third project. But my informational speech was on Steve Jobs essentially saving the music industry along with Apple with the introduction of iPod. And so I gave this speech on sort of where the music industry was, how Steve Jobs came along with the iPod, and how the iTunes store sort of changed music for the future. And what this device that was like, was it 2,000 songs in your pocket, I think, or
1,000 songs in your pocket?
1,000, thank you, 1,000 songs in your pocket. How that changed everything. And it was funny because and like I included some clips of Jobs speaking, but afterward, the critique that I got from people was that that the informational speech shouldn't seem so persuasive. So they felt like I was trying to sort of convince them that Steve Jobs was this awesome guy, and I was like, I feel like that just sort of comes with the topic, because it's like I was genuinely excited about the fact that he had done this thing, but I thought that was funny, and I mean it speaks to how I feel about the guy, because there are plenty of stories out there about some of the negative aspects of his personality and his leadership style. And, those are things that I think that anyone who really likes the company and likes Steve Jobs and likes the things that he did, they don't condone. But in saying, they liked this guy and they liked what he brought to the table, it's that creativity and that spark that I think that many of us want to have within us, and try to grow within ourselves, and to see that so present and I don't know, to be able to have someone to look to that's like these things and this mindset and the way that all works to make this company that came from nothing like twice is really incredible. And it's awesome to have that sort of role model and say, this creativity and caring about typefaces and kerning and sweating the details, those things that sometimes we get told that aren't as important. We see somebody who does care about those things and get to go, see, he cared about those things, and look where Apple is today. And that feels really cool. So I thank him for that in particular.
Definitely. Yeah.
Do we have any other thoughts about Steve Jobs, other than we, of course, will have a link in the show notes to the piece from Renee, and as well as, some information there, so you can go and check out that article.
Awesome.
All righty. Let's go ahead and move on. Oh, Renee. Oh, buddy. You've got some FUD to bust.
Or is it FUD?
See, I don't know yet.
Do we bust it? How do we feel? What has Apple like? Tell us everything. What did
Bloomberg article? Okay,
yes.
So Bloomberg published this monster bombshell article, something that they'd spent, I believe, over a year researching. And it wasn't entirely new news. We'd heard some of it before. But basically what Bloomberg asserts is that this company, Supermicro, which produces motherboards and servers for some of the biggest companies in the world, for data centers, large and small, everyone from Apple to Amazon to banks and other companies. They said 30 US companies. They only identified Apple and Amazon, which was weird, but they said 30 companies, including at least a major US bank. Now, they claim that the motherboards were infected by a hardware chip that basically people from Chinese intelligence, the People Liberation Army, went to outsourced factory manufacturers in China and offered them money or threatened them with business closing inspections to get them to add these little chips to the motherboards. And these chips would provide them essentially with backdoor access into these servers. These were servers made by Elemental, which is a company that does streaming video. If you've ever seen high-end live video stuff, almost all the time they're using Elemental servers. And they were in the process of being acquired by Amazon, who I believe wanted to use them for Amazon Prime. Where now, according to Bloomberg, Amazon had some of the servers sent to Canada for a third-party security check, and they found these chips. And Apple at the same time found these chips and alerted the FBI, and they began an investigation, and Apple and Amazon and others closed their contracts, quit doing business with Supermicro, which, you know, hurt Supermicro. But basically that these chips had been on these servers. And it's a weird story because it looks like it wasn't really given a tech edit, because a lot of what they say is kind of nebulous and maybe wrong, but, you know, maybe they're just trying to not divulge too much. It's hard to tell. Like, can a chip this small do it? Where was the chip? Was it taking resources from the server to do this? Was there any actual communication? Were these servers taken over? What information was exchanged? A lot of people say these servers are not the kind that are actually on the internet, but they're sitting there on cameras doing real-time compression work. So it's like the stupidest thing to try to infiltrate. And if the Chinese company could do this, why wouldn't they just, like, why would they go to the trouble of making this chip and not just getting them to infect an existing chip on the, I mean, there's all these questions. But they put up this report, and that wasn't the weird thing, because you see reports like this from time to time. The weird thing is how strongly Apple and Amazon pushed back. Apple, whose PR is inaccessible most times, terse at the best of times, put out a statement that was paragraphs long, and then later posted it up on their newsroom with additional information, basically saying none of this is true. They contacted us over and over again. We kept telling them it wasn't true. The details are wrong. The big picture is wrong. The stuff isn't used the way they said it was used. We never used the stuff the way they said we used it. And then Amazon, AWS, Amazon Web Services, their director of IT put up basically a similar thing, saying this is all wrong. Like, we don't use this stuff the way they said we use it. We would not have bought them if this was the case, because Amazon still did buy Elemental. And it's really, I think, unprecedented, at least in my experience, with companies this large and with news outlets this large, because Bloomberg Businessweek is a big deal publication. This isn't like a tabloid. They have gotten things wrong about Apple in the past, including the iPhone X sales numbers, including some of the stuff with Face ID security. So they're not above getting things wrong. And I think that's just a mix of arrogance and ignorance. You know, they don't know everything they think that they know, and they're a little bit too cautious or narcissistic to check. But this, again, years long, you'd think that their fact checkers would have fact checkers, that they would absolutely nail this. And on the surface, it looks, like I said, weird, and it could be weird, but you don't think that Bloomberg would publish this if they didn't know it. But on the other side, Amazon and Apple are public companies, and if they lie about this, the SEC can investigate them. Shareholders can sue them. And you can say they're under a gag order, but Apple said they're not under a gag order. And if they were under a gag order, they would say no comment, or they just wouldn't answer. And if they were not allowed to talk about it, they would have a much more restrained response. And people have said, well, maybe Apple and Amazon legal know about it, and the people on the ground, but not like the executive committee. But still, all these press releases have to go through legal, and legal allowing them to lie is probably not going to happen. You'd probably see like a statement that would just say Apple has no knowledge of this, but is looking, like, you'd see something way more nebulous just to literally cover their asses. But this was a full-on, you idiots got this wrong, and badly. And so we're stuck with, like, do you believe this storied publication with this huge history of doing good, diligent reporting, or do you believe these companies that, would suffer enormously if they were to lie about this?
But they would also suffer enormously if it was discovered to be true. You have to take that angle too.
So I don't know. Like, if they just said, yeah, we found these chips in the servers, they never made it live, they didn't get any customer data. As soon as we discovered the chips, called the FBI and pulled them out of the server room, I think we'd be like, crap, China's doing a lot of infiltration work. I'm so glad you guys caught it.
I am completely as confused as you are, Renee. I can't say that. I can tell you a couple of things. Number one, Bloomberg's report was very detailed and came from 17 different sources. Number two, Apple and Amazon's refutation of this article is very detailed and has very specific comments about it being wrong. I mean, on both sides, like, there's no way that just you or I or anybody just reading these things could know for sure which person is telling the truth and which person is lying. Everything that you're saying makes complete sense, that with these major companies getting caught in a lie would be detrimental to them. But
it's never the crime, it's always the cover-up. That's what always hurts you.
Yeah, but think about this. If Bloomberg, if everyone thinks that Bloomberg lied, it's just a bit of like oh, of course they lied, fake news. And that's about it. The company doesn't go under, like Bloomberg continues to exist.
Now, I should say there is a third angle, just because this might play into that. The third angle, it's not so much that Bloomberg lied, that Bloomberg got it wrong. Like they can earnestly believe this is true, and they could just have bad sourcing, or they might have secondary sources who misunderstood, or they might misunderstand what their sources told them. The third angle is that this is manipulation. The same way they manipulate markets by saying the iPhone is not selling, so they go and short the stock. Some people believe that because we're in a trade dispute and because we're in an intelligence war, with China, that it is in the best interest of some people if there is immense pressure put on companies to repatriate manufacturing and to take control over intellectual property, and that might play into that. That's really tinfoil hat conspiracy theory to me, but you never can discount entirely people pushing agendas.
And that's exactly as conspiracy as that sounds, like, because this is so polarizing on both ends, that you have to start considering these things that normally you would say are like, oh, that's just ridiculous. Nobody, no, that no way. But to kind of go back to my point of it also kind of aligns with what you're saying here, is that if a major corporation like Apple or Amazon were to have, if it were to come out that they at some point had things that were hardware that was hacked in their system, in their service, it could be detrimental to that company. It could be detrimental to the US economy. Just like what you're saying is like this idea that, people say that the iPhone isn't doing well and the stock market plummets. Imagine if everyone in the country thought that Apple and Amazon were using hacked hardware, that there was nothing they could do about it. And no matter what, that particular statement isn't true, but that doesn't mean that there's not thousands of people who would start questioning that and thinking that that was true, and the detriment to those companies and the detriment to the entire economy at large could be negatively affected. Whereas accusing Bloomberg of just getting it wrong isn't as dangerous as finding out that this information is actually true.
Here's where it confuses me. And Micah, maybe this confuses you too, but like, we are going to find out. That's the part I don't understand, is like, if there's an FBI investigation, maybe an NSA investigation, I'm less sure about those, but there are Freedom of Information Acts, there are points in time where you actually find out, was there an investigation or not? And then we'll know like who got this right and wrong. So why take this risk if you're not absolutely sure?
Yeah, and I guess that's where I come in and say there's the logic for me, is I don't think that a company would put themselves out there like that, because like it'll come to light. And so to me, and I see a lot of other people sort of using this as proof too, if you have it out there that, you absolutely 150,000% say, this is not something that's going on, and here's how this publication handled things, and here's how they didn't, and here's how it was improper, and here's how it, made sense. All of those things to me point to a company that already sort of tiptoes around stuff, and like you said, tiptoes around stuff and doesn't get involved whenever they don't really feel like they should. This is one of those things where the fact that they've come so hard out against it, to me, is proof enough. Because
they know that we know that, and that's why they did it. So that, I mean,
no,
how
Renee,
deep can we go?
No, don't do that. Don't do that. That's what
follow the money, Micah Sargent. Follow the money.
That's what this is one of those stories that's going to go into the mainstream, and I, being the face of Apple with my family, am going to hear about it and hear how I'm responsible for the fact that Apple is stealing data from them because of a bad chip that's blah, blah, blah.
How could you let them do that? Micah,
right,
how could you let them do that?
How could I? And I get to do the fun thing of trying to explain sort of what is known and what is not known. And I have trouble with this because Bloomberg is not one of these irresponsible, tiny, it's not a rag. You know what I mean? It's not a tiny little newspaper that also reports on Bigfoot, meeting up with the Tooth Fairy and having lunch with Steve Jobs. Like, this is not that. And so that gives weight to this story, and that makes it harder, I think, to sort of understand what's going on. And this is one of those times where, like you've said, I think too, we're all still trying to learn what's right and what's not, because I'm not going to tell my family a lie. Whenever I get asked, I'm going to say what I do know and what I don't know. And that makes it tough to figure out exactly what is going on. So I guess all I'm saying here is that shruggy emoji, honestly. Yeah.
There's also this, this is hard to talk about. There's always been this sort of sentiment in the air of how it's dangerous for the US to work with other countries that we haven't had like the best past with, which I've always considered to be just a sense of nationalism and fear mongering. And if any of this is true, if there is like a organization that has infiltrated the hardware of our servers in the US, it just calls some of that into question, not entirely, because I do still feel like, this sort of nationalistic fear mongering is not healthy for anybody. But I mean, wow, right? Like, it's like inviting, someone to come into your house to clean it, even though that they're not trustworthy, but you're going to trust them anyway. And then years later, you notice that some of your jewelry had been stolen. Mm-hmm. And then you think, well, we did invite this person to come in and clean our house while we weren't away. Did we make the right decision?
When you look back, we buy cars from Italy, Germany, and Japan, which were the three Axis powers. I mean, like history has a way of inverting on us. There has been juice jacking where USB ports were compromised. People bought cheap USB frames from China and they got malware inserted. But also like the US government, according to the Snowden papers, they would intercept devices, put malware on it and send them on to Iran or China or other places. So like every intelligence agency does this stuff. I think the question is whether, for me, like this would be just another in a long string of security issues that we have to deal with as we become increasingly reliant on cloud infrastructure. It's the Bloomberg versus Apple and Amazon thing that I find so fascinating, because they were all willing to go so all in on this, and they can't all have the best hand at the table. Someone there is either bluffing or doesn't understand. Like I've got an ace through a 7, a jack, and they're different colors. Do I win? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, this is such a crazy story to have come out, and the follow-up from it is just as crazy, of trying to kind of like parse out how we receive this information and how we take it. There's this part of me that wants to just believe these press announcements from Amazon and Apple that, this is all just misunderstood information, because that solves everything in my brain and makes me okay with like, okay, everything is fine. And, none of this even happened at all. I would actually rather have heard from these companies, yeah, that did happen and we already took care of it and there's nothing to worry about. That's actually what I expected, was like, this did happen and there's nothing to worry about. None of our servers have these chips on it anymore. And we've put in place all these systems to make sure that this would never happen again. Like that's what I kind of expected to happen.
In the worst case scenario, these chips were found by Apple and Amazon very quickly. And that's the worst case scenario.
Yeah. That's
either they didn't exist or they were found before they did any damage.
Right. Oh boy, but I don't want to think that anyone's lying. I want everyone to tell the truth. Is that too much to ask?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where there is no multiple. Like sometimes the internet is very bad at multiple truths, but sometimes multiple things are true. This isn't one of those cases. This is a case where either Bloomberg did not understand and misreported something at a huge scale, or Apple and Amazon have incredible problems with their internal controls and communications. So we'll find out.
Yeah, I guess
Shrug emoji.
I guess we will find out. Before
I did an explainer video. I did an explainer video on Vector. If anyone wants a deep dive and is interested, I did like a last minute 15-minute video.
Yeah,
to go through it all.
It was really, really, really fantastic, and just kind of laid out this information in a very clear way. I definitely recommend it for anyone who's listening right now who might still be a little bit in the dark about exactly what was happening. Renee's video is really useful and helpful understand. We'll link in our show notes too.
And when family members ask, you can say, "Hey, here's a link to this video. Go watch this video." And then you don't have to do it yourself. Yay! Let me go ahead and tell you about something else that helps you not have to do everything yourself. It's our dear pals at ZipRecruiter. Now, ZipRecruiter is a let me try this again because I am confused here by what's going on. All right. So if you're wanting to hire, ZipRecruiter is an excellent way to do that. You can hire using other job sites, which isn't smart, but you can use ZipRecruiter, which is incredibly smart, because these job sites are going to help you figure out exactly what you need and get it there so quickly, because other job sites are going to overwhelm you with tons of the wrong resumes, and ZipRecruiter is going to get you there at ZipRecruiter.com/iMore. Unlike other job sites, ZipRecruiter doesn't wait for candidates to find you. ZipRecruiter finds them for you. Its powerful matching technology scans thousands of resumes, identifies people with the right skills, education, and experience for your job, and actively invites them to apply. So you get qualified candidates fast. There's no more sorting through resumes, no more waiting for the right candidates to apply. It's no wonder that ZipRecruiter is rated #1 by employers in the US. And that rating comes from hiring sites on Trustpilot with over 1,000 reviews. Right now, our listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address. That's ZipRecruiter.com/iMore. ZipRecruiter.com/IMO. ZipRecruiter.com/IMORE. ZipRecruiter.com/iMore. Because ZipRecruiter is the smartest way to hire. All right, let's go ahead and move on to talk about, Tim Cook has been conversing a lot more lately. I saw him the other day showing off an emoji in an interview, and that was kind of fun. And now he's talking about privacy and how it is Apple's culture. Like, it is at the forefront of their thinking in the production of their software, their hardware. And I think that, at one point, one could be accused of pushing forward a narrative that maybe there wasn't proof existed whenever those of us who really like Apple talked about Apple being privacy first. And I think we've gotten to a place now where Apple has made it very clear and very present and very easily, you can go check the receipts essentially to see how Apple cares about privacy. Renee, you put together a great article following the interview here. So do you want to tell us a little bit about this Vice interview and what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I have two big takeaways from this. The first is that Apple has really made privacy a top-down, customer-facing, first priority thing at Apple, like accessibility, like security, like performance. So when they come up with new products, and Face ID is a great example, the privacy team is in there from the inception, because they're not going to build it and then figure out how to make it private. They're going to build it to be private from the start. And if they hit any obstacles where privacy is compromised, they stop and they do not move forward until they have collectively figured out how to address the privacy concerns. And yes, that does, there were questions like, does that slow you down compared to the Amazons and the Googles of the world? Or does that make your job more difficult? And yes. Yeah, Craig Federighi has said yes, but they believe it is so important and it's such a differentiator for them, and it is such the right thing to do that it is simply the way it has to be done. The most interesting question, noted to me, was the last one, where there's this old cliche about, once you create utopia, into whose hands can you trust it? Because even if you make the world perfect, at some point you'll have a successor and they could screw it all up on you. And they asked, like, Tim Cook, like, what happened? Like, what happens if you change your mind on privacy, or if you step down and the person who takes over doesn't care about privacy? And that's an incredibly important question. And Cook, he gave the best answer he could. Steve Jobs cared desperately about privacy. He's famous for saying, you ask your customers, then you ask them again, then you ask them again. You ask them until they tell you to stop asking them. And explained that privacy wasn't just something that he dreamt up in the last few years. It's something that's been deeply held with Apple the entire time. It is part of their culture, and he believes anyone who would succeed him would share that as part of his culture. So you never really know what would happen, but I think the odds are in Apple's favor that this sort of policy will continue to be a differentiator for them for years to come.
Yeah, presumably whomever would be chosen to replace Tim Cook would also have the same kind of privacy sentiment, and they wouldn't just have any old person take over. It would have to be somebody they could vet,
like
and make
Senator
sure
Caldwell in the boardroom going, nope, nope, nope.
Yep.
That's that's what I hope happens.
Yeah. So there was something, Renee, that you had written in your article about it, which is this sort of idea that by not using all of our data to make things smarter for us, there's this sort of general sentiment that it leaves these companies behind, Apple specifically behind, when it comes to the advancement of this. That's not necessarily true. And I think that it's clear that Apple is succeeding at not gathering and collecting all of our data to make things better, because it's still, the highest profiting company. And I think, though our digital virtual assistant isn't perfect, I think that we're able to kind of navigate that world with a sense of safety, knowing that we're still kind of protected in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting to me. Like, I think Apple it is inarguable that Apple lags behind companies like Google and, in some degree, Amazon and services like Google Photos is brilliant. Like, you can find almost anything, but I don't use it because I don't trust Google with my photos. So its utility to me is near zero. Google Assistant can do way more things than Siri, but I don't use it because when I have a Google Pixel 2. I always buy the new Google phone. When I go to set it up, it says, can we have access to monitor your app and web usage? And I say, hell no. And it says, well, then you can't use Google Assistant. And I go, but why? Why can't I say open up the music app without giving you they're saying our deal is we want your data in exchange for our services. And it might be, I don't know if it's right or not that Apple suffers for lack of data. Apple is playing catch up in services regardless. And it just means they have to work really hard. And like they did with Face ID, they paid people, tens of thousands of people, to come in and let them take selfies with them. And I think when I see stories like Google selling facial recognition to military drone programs, which they stopped doing after protests, or Amazon trying to sell facial recognition technology to law enforcement crowd control systems, which they stopped doing after protests. I'm glad my selfies are not being trained for them to profit off things that I just morally have questions about. So I feel like I'm not getting the same quality of service, but I'm okay with that because I feel like the privacy protections for now are more important. But I do think that Apple can do the work to catch up and make it a horse race. And I don't think the lack of massive data harvesting is crippling. I think it might slow them down. It might make an already hard task harder, but I don't think it prevents them from doing it. It's
sort of like the rabbit and the turtle and the hare. Apple is the turtle in this regard, but while the hare is out dancing with the ladies, the turtle's gonna cross the finish line.
Hey, yeah.
I like that. That's good.
So this is way off track, but you guys are gonna love this and laugh, even though it's off track. So don't expect this to be a part of this privacy related thing. But I just watched this horror film the other day called Hellfest, and the killer in this movie, he kills somebody and then pulls the phone out and uses the dead guy's finger to unlock his phone, which I thought was very timely to in this kind of discussion of how can people access your phone. I thought that was a clever little thing, because that really does play into all of our fears of, well, somebody can access my phone if they can use my finger, or if they can just put my phone up to my face.
If they made Silence of the Lambs today, Anthony Hopkins' mask could totally unlock someone's phone.
Oh no! Now I'm thinking instead of put the lotion, put your finger in the basket. Put your finger in the basket.
Yeah. So just a little off-track morbidity based on.
I thought you were going to talk about the new Mandalorian TV show, so you totally.
Oh man! Oh, I'm very excited that Jon Favreau is kind of manning the helm on this. I'm assuming that he'll probably just do the first handful of episodes, maybe the first season at the most, because usually they don't.
I was hoping it would be Sabine, so now they have to prove themselves to me.
I am super glad that it's a completely new story with a completely new person added to the team. Like just like having Sabine join, the clone The
The Rebels.
The Rebels, thank you. Having brand new characters introduced into this storyline to me, are just a fantastic way to keep broadening the Star Wars and universe.
We could have had Sabine and Ahsoka's Excellent Adventures.
Welcome back from Pop Culture Corner with Renee Ritchie and Lori Gill. I would like to welcome you back. Thank you for joining us here on the iMore show.
Sorry, Micah. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I love a good Pop Culture Corner, and I hope that one day we will have a bit of a theme song so that we can introduce Pop Culture Corner as it comes along. Lori, that's up to you.
Corner. Pop Culture Corner.
That's like it has to be super punky if Lori's going to make it. So let's go ahead and move on to talk about, some folks out there maybe were disappointed with Apple's September event, not in and of itself, because new phones fun, yada, yada, yada. But okay.
You just yada, yada new phones.
Well, okay, but that's because this is so boring and it's not hot blue. Anyway.
That's not what Anantech said this morning, Micah Sargent.
Well, okay, we can talk about these phones, but what's important right now is that we talk about the fact that iPads, Macs, and other things that we had heard about over the course of the summer were not mentioned at Apple's September event, and we think there may be maybe an October event in our future. So what can people expect at this potential October event?
So I should set expectations by saying Apple could just drop these in a press release. They could just have briefings and then, have reviews go up. But I hope they do an event, because I think if these products are what we think they are, then it'll be super exciting to see them get a proper introduction on stage. I like new designs to get introductions because I want to hear what Apple thinks about them. Like, I want that to be the starting point. And the rumor is we're going to get new iPads Pro, a new Baby Pro and a new Biggie Pro that have sort of the iPhone 10, Apple Watch Series 4 design language, where they go closer to edge. The bezels and the home button get mostly deleted. Well, the home button gets completely deleted, RIP home button, but the bezels get minimized, and the sort of casing around the displays gets taken away. So they're just as powerful, but they're a little bit more portable. And from the Mac, we're hearing these rumors about a new replacement for the MacBook Air that will be more modern than the current MacBook Air, but not as expensive as the current 12-inch MacBook. Something that is a good entry point Mac that has Retina display and Touch ID. And, last but certainly not least, a new Mac Mini, which has been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, and now might come back not only in and of itself, but with Pro-centric features like more memory and more drive space and things like that. So it could be hella exciting for people who aren't just phone fans.
Yeah. Lori, are you excited? You're more than a phone fan.
Yeah. So, I mean, that all of this seems like a really interesting and wonderful concept, and it's definitely who knows, it may not happen at all. But I think an updated iPad is imminent. The only reason it wouldn't happen in October is because they're just not ready to ship this completely new redesigned iPad Pro, the Maxi iPad Pro.
There you go. I like that. That was good. For anybody who's listening, Lori just did the thing where you sort of lick your fingers and then go across your eyebrows to spread them out, and it was pretty great.
So a new design with edge-to-edge screen and Face ID replacing Touch ID on an iPad is fantastic, and I look forward to it. And it seems impossible that it wouldn't happen at some point, just whether or not they're ready now. I love this idea that the MacBook Air and MacBook might be sort of getting folded in together. This is something that kind of popped up a couple of months ago, and we haven't really heard many other rumors about it. But if it's true, it would be an entry-level notebook that replaces the MacBook Air. Might be almost as light, but maybe slightly heavier, but has more features like a MacBook would have. And, it would be low cost entry level. I think I like this idea. I like that this could be something that college students could use. A person getting out on their own for their first time, or maybe if you're buying a new MacBook for your child, their first computer.
So I have a tough question for you there, Lori. What ports should it have?
Oh, God.
I know, right?
It should have 2 USB-C. I'm going to just,
No USB-A?
I just slapped it down just now. 2 USB-C and nothing else. One on each side.
What about VGA? I mean, there are some people who still need VGA. Dongle me a VGA
nonsense. I do like I like the HDMI port on my MacBook Pro. That's
I
kind of
miss
nice.
the SD card slot. That's my big miss.
Yeah, and the SD card slot is nice as well.
Everything that you're saying, I'm just constantly going, yeah, but I have a dongle for it. Yeah, but I have a dongle for it. Yeah, but I have a hub for it. And you're right. People don't want to have to carry around or buy dongles or hubs or whatever, but like it works. It works.
So I have a theory, because if you've ever used a Pro machine, you just always live with dongles. Like I've had a DVI, double DVI, mini DVI, DisplayPort, mini DisplayPort, Thunderbolt 2, VGA, HDMI. I've had FireWire 400, FireWire 800, Ethernet. I've had so many dongles with every single generation of Mac. But I think the difference here is that USB-A was so mainstream that it hit the non-nerds, and the non-nerds were not used to #dongle life.
Yes, I think that is absolutely the case. But I think too that it seems to me a lot of times the non-nerds are better at adapting to new futures than those of us who exist in the tech space, because I can't remember, I was just talking, it might have been on Clockwise, but we were talking about folks using headphones and the future where, you know, they aren't including now the little lightning to headphone jack adapter, blah, 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 blah. And my siblings had already sort of like figured out that future and were okay with it. And when it came to like USB-A versus USB-C, they're just like, oh, so this needs a like they don't necessarily, well, a couple of my siblings do. One of my siblings does not know USB-A versus USB-C, but they're like, oh, so what cord do I need? And then I'm like, okay, here's a link to this cord. And they're like, okay, cool. So then they just get the cord. Like they're not, you know, pushing back and getting.
They have Mica Care.
They have Mica Care, but they don't care. Like for me to get that and be like, wait, I have to buy this extra thing and I have to, you know, I have to carry these 12 extra dongles. They're just sort of like, okay, well, I guess we gotta get
puppies.
Right. Guess we got to get rid of all these USB-A cords and throw those away. And we're just switching to the new one. They're fine with it. Whereas I'm like, but I love every single one of these USB-A cords.
They're
and I've named all of them. They're my children. Like I've given them all Christmas presents. No, so it's kind of funny that the general public seems less like they're sometimes more prone to confusion, but when the confusion is quelled, then they're just like, okay, I'm not confused anymore. I know what cord I need. I can use that cord. Everything's fine. And I don't think that we give folks enough credit for that, where they are easier to sort of just accept the change that is taking place because they don't feel like we do that they have power over that. Like they don't understand it enough to feel like they have power over it. And therefore it's just like a change that's coming on. Go ahead.
We had one of our mutual friends on Twitter, who I will not tech shame on this podcast, put up this picture of all the dongles they needed for their new 12-inch MacBook. And I was like, no, please, can I just walk you over to the MacBook Pro cable, the cable, because that computer is way better for you. But they're like, no, this is a new computer, and I should be able to use a new computer. I'm like, but no, but now Apple has several new computers. Gone is the age where every product had to be for everyone. You can find one that's best for you now.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not new is not always better. Or newest is not always better. And the idea that every device is made for those of us who are steeped in tech is silly, because it's not. I think the iPhone XR is one perfect example of that. I'm mad that I don't get to have hot blue, but it's like not made for me if I want to have those awesome specs.
I want purple.
I want green. I just really want green, Renee.
They left out our Hulk and Lex Luthor colors on purpose.
They did. They knew we wanted those things, and they're against us.
Every bad person, like Brainiac, they're all green and purple. I wonder if there's a conspiracy.
Why do I like green?
The Green Goblin.
I feel like they did the two of you a favor by not putting them in your favorite colors, because you would have ended up buying two phones.
Okay, see, yeah. I would have probably not gotten if they had a green iPhone. I swear on I don't know. I'm trying to find something around me that
So
I
do
don't
you want to know
that
why
much
they
about.
don't have it, Micah?
I swear on this Blistex that I would have absolutely gotten the iPhone XR instead of the iPhone XS Max, because the like, I'm already complaining about the fact that this new phone isn't that new and that much better than the iPhone 10. So if I could have had a green phone, that would have been so cool.
So, like, take this with a grain of salt. But if from someone who knows a lot about anodization, I heard that green is really hard to anodize, which is why some of the iPods have had not very good shades of green. It's really hard to get green right on aluminum. So I
I
think I would
also,
rather not good.
speaking from knowledge from my significant other who used to be a house painter, he has said the same thing about just painting walls. The color of green, various greens, is that people will look on a little card that has a color on it, and they love that color, but as soon as it goes on their wall, it looks terrible. Green and blue, they're both of those colors they're just really difficult to make as a color. There's something about them that doesn't you outside of their purest form of just being the color itself. It's difficult and complicated to kind of make that work right in other ways.
Interesting. Well, I guess I'm complicated.
Yes. You're earthy.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is. Okay, here's something exciting. Lego Apple Park. What?
Oh my God. Oh
Isn't
my God.
this the prettiest thing?
This is incredible.
Are you looking at the picture? So
yeah, this is beyond belief.
We'll link this in the show notes. And if anybody is listening to this and is just sitting in front of their computer, just Google search Lego Apple Park and you'll see how incredible this is. It's an amazing little thing. Just the detail is incredible.
It's totally amazing. I forget the guy's name, Spencer something.
Let's see, Spencer. I just had it. Spencer. Oh, now it's gone. Spencer R is what it says.
Websites that don't actually link to the darn thing that they are covering. It's so nonsense.
Mizzy heard me getting excited about this Lego thing, and she came a running. Spencer Rezkala. Or Spencer Rezkaya could be.
I'm going to screen share it for the people watching with us live.
Yeah, if you're watching live, then you can see the Lego Park. Cool.
It is amazing. Where's all of them? Let me just page through these. Like, he's got the ring. So people aren't familiar with the terminology. That's the ring, where it's the main office building. It's where like Tim Cook and all the executives and the software engineering groups and other groups are hiding. And the detail is amazing. That's a tiny Steve Jobs theater, which is just so cute looking, but so small compared to the ring. And they've got like little plant details. And you can see the different buildings there. There's the Apple Fitness Center and the Tantau buildings, and the detail in the solar panels that are on the roof and the little service centers. And that's one of the ancillary buildings. I forget who's in all of those buildings, but they have several buildings that are just on the outskirts of the campus. I think there's a river that goes through there.
I think I can picture myself sitting there in the Apple Visitor Center looking over at the ring. But you know what? The trees aren't tall enough, though.
I believe they have basketball and tennis courts. It's just really cool. Yeah. There's the entrance to the underground parking, where I believe Phil Schiller and Eddie Q have a secret Mario Kart track. Because why wouldn't you if it's a loop? Why wouldn't you if it's a loop?
I forgot Renee was one of the Mario people instead of Mario.
Mario. I'm just Canadian. Is it? I guess Italian. I guess Italian would be Mario. Yeah, Mario, Luigi. There we
I don't
go.
think that's a Canadian thing, by the way. That's just some people say Mario.
Mario. Okay, let's go.
We also say processors. Does that drive Americans crazy? Processors?
Oh, I kind of like that. That's fun.
Sounds nicer. Yeah. Do you say aluminium?
No, but I think we should.
I wish we all
aluminium.
I really wish that we all said aluminium, but the couple of times when I've said it,
people look at you like, ugh.
Yeah,
exactly. So weird to me, but some people say that, like England.
Well, another word that's kind of strange. It's the word that means that blade that comes down and used to chop people's head off. I know that's really grim, but it's actually pronounced guillotine, but most of us pronounce it guillotine.
Yes.
And every time I pronounce it correctly, someone's like, don't you mean guillotine? And then I just have to go on a sort of...
then you put them in a guillotine.
I do. I put them in a guillotine as I tell them about the etymology. Oh, no. She hit her head as she was trying to jump up on my lap.
Is she a jumper?
Yeah, she's very much a jumper. Let's round things out, I think, by talking about something that, oh boy, I've never wanted to leave the United States more quickly than I did on Wednesday, wasn't it? Yeah, on Wednesday, when a notification popped up on my phone and my phone was vibrating ridiculously, and we got a presidential I'm sorry, it's just bizarre. A presidential emergency alert test. What's going on, Lori Gill?
So we don't have any. So can I just ask you guys, we don't have any of these. You have like 3 now. You have Amber Alerts, emergency alerts, and presidential alerts. Do you get any sleep?
Well, let me just start by saying this is the first presidential alert in the history of alerts from the broadcasting system. This is the first time they've done it on phones. We've had presidential alerts through phone calls on landlines, I believe, and alerts through television and things like that. But this is the first time it's been sent out to mobile phones. So let me just speak to this for just a moment. It's fine. It doesn't mean anything. First of all, that was just a test. And just think of it as when you're watching broadcast television, randomly, there's this is a test of the emergency broadcast system, and it's the same thing. It's a way to send out to everybody in case of some sort of, widespread emergency, that there's a way for you to be given the information that you need to protect yourself or to do what you need to do. So it's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But it was like akin to what some people probably felt when they woke up one morning and there was U2 albums on their phone. It was this sense of this sense of just like literally everybody in the United States that has a phone just got the same thing as me, or at some point throughout the day got the same thing as me. It was weird. It felt weird. It felt and there was no way that you could turn it off. We were told ahead of time that this test was coming, so it wasn't out of the blue. We were warned of it and just kind of let everybody know you don't have to do anything. We're just testing it out to make sure that it works. And you can turn off emergency notifications on your iPhone in your settings. You just in the same way that you can turn off Amber Alerts, but you can't stop the presidential emergency alert from happening, even when you turn off emergency alerts. So it was a very weird feeling. Again, this is a good thing. It just felt weird.
Yeah, it's the lack of consent that's the issue for me, more than anything else. The fact that I don't have an option to opt out of it. And I think so. Here's the thing: is I don't really watch. I'm a cord cutter for one, but even still, I don't really watch TV much anymore, or Netflix, or any of those things. Most of the time, if I'm in taking media, it's like a podcast or music or an audiobook. And I had a thought not too long ago: what would happen if something did happen and I had no way of knowing about it? Because when growing up, we would get it from the local news, because my parents and my grandparents would always watch the news at night. And it used to be that everybody would sit around the radio and listen to the radio in the United States. They'd have their nightly shows, and that's when they'd also get the news. And these days, we don't have those things as much. And so when something locally happens, I don't really know about it. Like, luckily,
like a blizzard warning. Do you get like blizzard warnings on this?
Not through this. No, would come up like if you have a weather app downloaded. That's where that would come from. That's a whole other system.
And if you have this standard emergency alerts on, you do get certain major notifications from, like, for example, when the World Trade Center was attacked, that would have been something that would have gone out on. So
like if there's a kaiju attack, you'd learn about this, but like an earthquake or something wouldn't come through with it.
Not through that. Yeah, you'd have to have some other way of finding that out. And
so what's it? I'm sorry, I'm really Canadian dumb. What's the difference between a presidential alert and an emergency alert?
Exactly.
We don't know. Exactly. Okay. All right.
Exactly.
So we don't know why we need both of them is the thing.
Right. This came along and it was like, oh, he wants to let everybody know what's going, like he wants to have another button to press essentially instead of just the emergency alert button. And I think that's where sort of, joke Twitter came around and we talked about the annoyance of this. And I like the fact that it is called the presidential emergency alert or the presidential alert or whatever, like that adds to the confusion of it. What is this and how is it different from just an emergency alert? Nobody knows except for the fact that you can't opt out of it, which is really annoying because I think for those of us in the US and probably in other countries where you have a lot of freedoms, the idea that we consent to things is very important and very like centered to our beings and our beliefs. Autonomy is so important. And so something like this personal device that exists to connect me to people and keep me from, like, I can use it to not pay attention to certain things, to have this still come through without me saying I'm okay to have this, it's bothersome. And I think that's where some of the annoyances come from and some of the concern has come from. But I agree with Lori in the sense that it is kind of nice to know that if a kaiju attack were to happen, then we do have this thing and there's no way that I could like do not disturb it to non-existence. Yeah. I think it's just for me, it's about
doubling up on it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Doubling up on it doesn't make sense. The communicating like the difference between these two is important to me. And then, like I said, the fact that there's not a third switch now in notifications that says presidential alerts turn on or off. No, I don't.
Are we going to get Queen alerts and it'll be like scone time, and like every phone goes off?
Well, so presidential alerts, though we don't know the details of what the differences is between the two. Presidential alerts have been happening. Every president enacts a presidential alert. It's just that this is the first time it's happened on our mobile devices. We've received them in different methods before, and this is the first time they've been on our mobile devices. And that's why, just like Micah, what you're saying is it's our phones are so personal to us that it does feel like somebody didn't knock on your front door. They just walked through your front door.
Yeah. Hey, I'm just testing out this new emergency key that lets me into anybody's house at any time. Now I'm waving my hands at you and buzzing, and I'm shaking you 15 times because
we've been in love for 10 years, and this is our first moment alone together, and I love you so much.
That's exactly. I immediately, because I didn't know that I'm disconnected. I honestly didn't know that this was a real thing. I thought it was a thing that our president had talked about wanting to do and that the emergency alert folks had wanted to do. And it was more of like a joke because at this current time, like it wasn't going to go through. And so when I got that notification, I immediately texted my co-host, Dan, because we had just finished up Clockwise. And I was like, I thought that was a joke that people were having on Twitter. I didn't realize this was a real thing. And he was in a coffee shop and everybody in the coffee shop, all of their phones were buzzing on the table or buzzing in their hands. And he's like, I've never seen so many annoyed faces at once.
This is the president. We having Space Force has engaged a shadow on the moon. Oh, damn. It was Armstrong's flag. I'm going to stop texting now.
Yeah, what happens? I want to know what the process is for enabling one of these. How many copy edit checks it goes through? Who all has to have?
Is it confusing with the Twitter button? Because that'll be bad for everybody.
Is it something that it has to go through 17 people and two keys turned at the same time before it gets turned on? Because the first thing that comes to my mind, I don't remember the exact details, but there was an emergency alert that went out in Hawaii.
They thought it was a missile attack.
But it was a test that wasn't supposed to go out to everybody, and it accidentally did. Mm-hmm. And this pops up in my head of like, this is not just one state, but an entire nation. Yeah. If accidentally an internal test, they accidentally hit the wrong button, it gets sent out to everybody, and it's something like Russians invading or something
was really attacking Cape Cod, and he's out there with a rifle.
Right.
It
just have the potential to scare a bunch of people. Yeah. And that's not great.
But it is great that it exists. And I do want to make sure I just am venting these weird feelings that I have about it, but I completely trust that this presidential alert system is meant for our good and will only be used for good.
That's the hope.
And those air raid sirens they're installing above the houses again, all that stuff.
I do have sirens, and I don't know if that's everywhere in the country, but certainly
it's not. And in Sacramento, the last Friday of every month, we get an air raid siren. And I have learned from my friends who are historians that it was the siren that was used decades and decades ago to announce payday for the month for workers back then. So they just out of nostalgia or out of historical sentiment, we just keep every day, every Friday, the last Friday of every month.
You have a dinner bell in Town Square too. Ding, 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 ding. Dinner's on the table.
We have tornado sirens here in the Midwest because we're in Tornado Alley. And those every first Monday of the month go off to make sure that they're still working. And I used to live right next to one. And so it was always like, brace yourselves. And the tornado siren would go off. But those are like, that's one of the things that I consider to be handy because I don't have to be paying attention to the local news to know, okay, we've got a tornado watch or a tornado warning. I can check my phone and, see the weather app and know exactly what's going on. And that's how I hope that this technology is going to be used too. And
we have ice bells, but they're always frozen.
Oh, that's funny. Canada. Well, I think that's going to do it for us this week.
Awesome.
We've reached the end of another episode of the iMore Show. Of course, I want to thank you all for listening. Renee Ritchie, if people are looking for you online, where can they find you?
I mean, the easiest place to find everything is imore.com/vector, or if you just want to watch the videos, youtube.com/vector show. And I'm at Renee Ritchie on all the social things.
Excellent. Lori Gill, if people are looking for you online, where can they find you?
Let me first just say that this episode was not nearly as boring as I thought it was going to be.
I know, right? Pulled our weight.
We don't need Georgia. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. You can find me at Appaholic on the Twitter feeds. That's APPAHOLIK. You can find me at Lori Gill at most of the other social things, and I'm writing all the things Apple related at iMore.
Excellent. If Georgia Dow were here, she would tell you that you could find her sometimes, occasionally on Twitter at Georgia_Dow. Don't forget that underscore. But you can also check out anxiety-videos.com if you're dealing with anxiety, boundary issues, and loads of other videos that they've put together. If you're looking for me online, you can find me at Micah Sargent on most social things, or you can head to chihuahua.coffee, CHIHUA.coffee for links to all the things I do. You can find all of our writing over on imore.com. I want to thank Jim Metzendorf for editing the show. He always makes us sound fabulous. And of course, we'll be back next week with more. But until then, I hope that whenever you're listening to this, you have a great week or weekend. This has been the iMore Show.
Bye.
Dum, 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 dum. Thanks, guys. That was awesome.